He had been driving along that empty desert highway for nearly 3 hours, and the night felt heavier with every mile. The world outside the windshield had dissolved into a flat, colorless void, the kind of darkness that didn't surround you, but pressed against the glass. No cars, no towns, not even the faint trace of a distant headlight, just the constant hum of the engine and the 2 narrow beams slicing across the asphalt. Fatigue gnawed at him. His eyelids felt weighted, his focus slipping in and out like a bad radio signal. He was already rehearsing the idea of pulling over and sleeping in the car, until a flicker appeared on the horizon. A trembling little glow, far too warm to be moonlight, far too steady to be a reflection. A neon sign. A motel. Out here. The closer he got, the stranger it looked. The sign read, Silver Ranch Motel, though half the letters were dead, and the one still alive pulsed weakly as if struggling to stay lit. The whole structure stood in a shallow basin of darkness, untouched by the headlights until he was almost on top of it. The parking lot was empty, not abandoned in a rush empty, but sterile, as if no car had ever parked there at all. The building stretched in a long half circle. Some doors were boarded up with crooked planks. Some hung loosely on rusted hinges, and a few, disturbingly few, looked brand new, as if they'd been installed yesterday. Nothing matched. Nothing was consistent. It felt like a place assembling and disassembling itself, unable to decide what decade it belonged to. On the exterior wall near the office, a faded map of the motel was tacked up behind cracked plastic. Rooms labeled 1 through 24. But even in the dim light, he noticed something impossible. There was no room 19. The numbers jumped straight from 18 to 20. A cold prickle crawled down his arms. The office door chimed softly as he stepped inside. The air felt stale, like it had been recycled too many times. A single lamp buzzed on the counter, its glow trembling as if the bulb were shivering. Behind the desk sat an old man with pale eyes, staring not at him, but through him, a gaze unfocused, dreamlike. His smile was polite, but disturbingly hollow, the kind of smile worn out from too much waiting. He didn't ask for ID, he didn't ask for payment. He simply reached under the counter and placed a single brass key on the desk. Room 19. The digits were stamped deep, impossibly clean compared to the corroded metal. For a moment, the man thought to correct him, to mention that the room didn't exist on the map outside. But something in the old man's expression warned him not to. The silence in the office felt too dense, too expectant. He took the key. When he stepped outside again, the night had thickened. The motel seemed even quieter now, as if listening. His footsteps echoed in ways they shouldn't have, slow, drawn out, almost hollow. He reached room 19, which sat in a darkened corner of the curve, recessed deeper than the others. The door looked newer than anything else in the entire establishment. Smooth wood, spotless handle, untouched by time. Inside, the room was normal, almost strangely normal. Clean sheets, neutral beige walls, a nightstand lamp that flickered once when he turned it on, then steadied. Everything looked recently updated, in stark contrast to the decaying exterior. It was as if the motel were falling apart around this one room. He tried to ignore the unease. He showered. He lay down. But the room didn't let him rest. He heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, dragging, too heavy for a single person. But when he looked through the peephole, the corridor was empty. He heard a whispering draft through the vent, but no breeze moved. And several times, just on the edge of sleep, he could swear he heard someone quietly repeating his name. Softly, rhythmically, patiently. He tried to convince himself it was just exhaustion.
But deep down, something in the room felt wrong.
Not threatening, not malicious, but aware and awake. He tried to force himself to sleep, but the room seemed to resist the idea. The air was still, too still, like everything inside those four walls was holding its breath. He turned on his side, then onto his back, listening to the quiet hum of the nightstand lamp. But beneath that, almost buried in the silence, he sensed a faint vibration, a subtle, irregular tremor running through the floorboards. Not movement, more like breathing. He sat up slowly. The lamp dimmed for a moment, as though a shadow had passed between it and the bulb, but the room was empty. He scanned the corners. Nothing but bland motel furniture and a thin veil of darkness clinging to the ceiling. He tried to dismiss it as exhaustion again, but the feeling crawling up his spine wouldn't let him rest. Eventually, the tremor faded. The quiet returned. He lay back down and drifted into a shallow, uneasy sleep. When he opened his eyes, the room was lit with a faint pre-dawn glow. The lamp was off. He was sure he hadn't touched it. His phone, which he'd left charging on the nightstand, was dark, completely dead. He pressed the power button. Nothing. He unplugged it, plugged it back in. Still nothing. The outlet looked normal, but there was something unsettling in how cold the charger felt, like metal left outside in winter. He rubbed his face and sat up. That's when he noticed the carpet near the doorway. A long, thin drag mark curved across it, as though something heavy had been pulled from the hallway into his room. The mark ended at the foot of his bed. He stood perfectly still. It wasn't there last night. He stepped back, heart pounding, and opened the door to the hallway. It was empty, silent. The entire motel seemed to be resting in a kind of suspended stillness. But the air felt different. Colder, sharper, as if something had passed through recently. On his way to the office, he glanced again at the map pinned to the wall outside. He froze. The map had changed. Where the night before there were 24 rooms drawn in a curved line, the building now appeared shorter. 4 of the rooms were gone entirely, erased cleanly, as if they'd never existed. The ink was faded and cracked, but the new layout was unmistakable. His own room, room 19, was no longer there. No smudge, no erasure marks, just missing. His pulse hammered in his ears. He stepped back, trying to convince himself he'd misread the numbers last night. But he remembered the gap clearly. 18, then 20. 19 had never been on the map. And yet last night, he had held the key, slept in the room, heard the footsteps, felt the presence. He glanced toward the row of doors. They seemed closer together today, as if the building had shrunk. The boarded-up rooms were still there, but their positions seemed shifted, a few inches, maybe more. The angles were wrong, slightly twisted, like the motel had settled unevenly overnight. He pushed open the office door. The old man wasn't there. The lamp on the counter flickered, then settled into a faint, sickly glow. The register book lay open, though he was certain it had been closed the night before. A draft moved through the room, but the air felt stale, as if it had passed through long sealed spaces. He stepped behind the counter. The register pages were brittle, yellowed with age, covered in names written in different inks, different handwritings. Most of the names were crossed out with a single straight line. There were no checkout times, only check-ins. He flipped through the pages until he reached the last one. His stomach tightened. There, at the very bottom of the page, written in the same neat, steady handwriting as the rest, was his own name. The date listed beside it was yesterday, but the time was hours before he had arrived. His fingers trembled as he traced the letters. He hadn't signed anything. The old man hadn't asked for his name. No one had written it in front of him. And yet, here it was. Perfect, precise, almost waiting. He closed the book quickly, the pages snapping shut with an unsettling crack. Something shifted behind him. Not loudly, just a quiet rustle, like fabric brushing against a wall. He turned slowly, expecting the old man, but the office was empty. The shadows seemed deeper, stretched unnaturally along the corners. He stepped outside. The world felt wrong, the air thicker, the sky dull and flat. He headed toward his car, but when he reached the parking lot, he stopped dead. His car wasn't there. Not misplaced, not stolen, not moved. Gone. The asphalt was bare in every direction, smooth, untouched, as if no tires had ever pressed into it at all. A wave of cold crept over him. He took a step back, then another, until he stood at the edge of the lot. When he turned around, the motel seemed farther, distorted. Its edges wavered in the early light, as if he were looking through invisible heat waves. He backed away slowly, pulse racing, unsure of what was real anymore. And that's when he noticed the footprints. His own footprints. A single trail of them, leading out from the desert, straight toward the motel. But he hadn't come from that direction. He had arrived on the highway. Yet the highway was no longer there. Just sand. Empty, endless sand stretching to the horizon. The world around him felt like it had reassembled in his absence, rearranging itself in ways he was never meant to witness. And somewhere inside that shifting silence, he felt it again. That sense, not of being watched, but of being claimed. He remained frozen for a moment, sensing the air around him grow denser, as if someone had quietly shut a door in an enormous room, and now the whole space was slowly closing in. It was still night outside, but the darkness had changed, heavier, thicker. The beam of his flashlight no longer illuminated the hallway. It pushed through it, like moving through something alive. The room numbers on the wall shifted slightly out of focus. The digits seemed to ripple, bending as though they were reflections in disturbed water. He blinked hard, and everything snapped back into place. Or maybe he only wanted to believe that. The hallway stretched forward, silent and empty, but with every step he took, the quiet deepened. Even his footsteps softened unnaturally, dissolving before they reached the walls. At the end of the hallway was a wall, a simple, peeling, stained wall. But something about it felt off. He slowed to a stop a few feet away, raising the flashlight. The shadow on the surface didn't match the flat texture. It revealed the outline of something the wall refused to show. A door, hidden in plain sight. He reached out. His fingers touched cold metal where his eyes saw only cracked paint. The temperature stung his skin. He pressed harder. Something shifted under his palm, a subtle tremor of hinges. He exhaled and pushed. The invisible door swung inward. Behind it was room 19, but not the abandoned, dust-choked version he remembered. Not the rotting furniture or the broken lamp or the mildew-stained floor. This room was familiar, disturbingly familiar. He stepped inside, and a sharp wave of recognition ran through him, the kind that steals the air right out of the lungs. It wasn't room 19 at all. It was his apartment, his old sofa, his kitchen table, his jacket hanging on the back of a chair, the same jacket he had lost 2 years ago and chalked up to forgetfulness. Everything looked exactly as he remembered it, except for a faint layer of dust coating every surface, as if time had stopped but decay had not. He walked to the table. A mug sat there, full of dried coffee. Next to it lay his old phone, dead for years, broken, incapable of powering on. And yet the screen was lit. A bright white glow illuminated the cracked glass. One new message. His pulse hammered against his ribs. He picked up the phone. It didn't respond to touch, but the message opened anyway, the way a nightmare knows exactly when to reveal its teeth. The message was short, 6 words. You should not have come back. His grip tightened. The room suddenly felt smaller, as if the walls were breathing in slow, synchronized intervals. A cold sensation crawled up his spine, and when he lifted his gaze, he noticed something he hadn't seen before, something impossible to miss. The door he had entered through was gone. Not closed, gone. In its place stood a blank wall, dust-covered, colorless, and solid. He took a step back, then another. The air grew thicker, pressing against his chest. The shadows seemed to pulse at the edges of the room. He wasn't alone anymore. Something in the corner shifted. He turned his head slowly, too afraid to move fully, knowing what he would see even before the darkness took form. And then it stepped forward. It stepped into the pale glow cast by the phone screen, slowly, like it wasn't moving through the room, but through him. At first, it resembled a man, a silhouette with weight, with presence, with an outline shaped by something once human. But the details refused to focus. They rippled across its form, as if the very idea of a face, of eyes, of features, couldn't hold still long enough to be understood. He didn't breathe. The thing raised its head. A faint sound filled the room. Not a whisper, not a breath, something more unsettling. A scraping, like layers of fabric sliding across each other in an empty attic. Or like the memory of movement, replaying itself long after the original body was gone. His throat tightened. He took one step back, but the wall met him instantly, cold and absolute. There was no escaping the room because this wasn't a room anymore. It was a trap, carved out of his own life, his own memories, twisted into a shape the motel wanted. The figure drifted closer. Its feet didn't touch the floor. It didn't disturb the dust. It left no shadow. But its presence pressed against him, a weight heavier than anything living could produce. Then it spoke. Its voice wasn't a voice, more like a chorus of echoes bleeding through a tunnel, a sound pulled from 100 places that should never overlap. "You never left." His skin crawled. His heartbeat stuttered. He whispered before thinking, I don't understand." The figure leaned forward. "You came back because you were always here." He felt the words inside his skull rather than through his ears. The room flickered, the light bending as though submerged under water. For a moment, he saw something else layered on top of the scene. Something far older. A different space. Longer. Narrower. Filled with rows of doors, each identical, stretching endlessly in every direction. A corridor with no end. A place where people didn't go missing. They simply stayed. The apparition raised an arm, slow and deliberate. Its hand pointed toward the center of the room. He turned, terrified to see what it was showing him, and froze. There was a second figure, sitting on the couch, its back toward him, its posture familiar. Too familiar. He knew that shape. The slope of the shoulders, the hair, the quiet way the hands rested on the knees. His breath broke, thin and sharp, when the truth slammed into him. He wasn't looking at someone else. He was looking at himself. The figure on the couch slowly turned its head, but not fully. Just enough for him to see the hollow, darkened eyes staring back. Not dead, not alive. Something suspended between the two, like a memory the motel had decided to preserve. His legs weakened. He stumbled backward, but the shadows behind him thickened, pushing him forward again, closer to the thing wearing his face. The version of him on the couch opened its mouth. No sound came out, but the movement was enough to break something inside him. He rushed to the nearest corner, desperation overtaking fear. He ran his palms along the wall, searching for seams, cracks, anything that might reveal a way out. Dust coated his fingers. The surface was solid and unbroken. Then, his hand dipped into nothing. A doorknob. Invisible, just like the one that had led him here. His fingers twisted it violently. The space around him shuddered. The walls trembled like they were breathing in reverse. He shoved the door open and hurled himself into the hallway. Except it wasn't a hallway at all. It was the motel lobby. But not the empty, abandoned version he had entered earlier. This one was alive. Lights glowed warmly. Chairs stood neatly arranged. A soft piano melody drifted through the air. Guests moved about, carrying luggage, chatting quietly, sipping drinks. Everything clean, everything modern, everything normal. Except not one person had a face. Blank skin stretched where features should be. Smooth, expressionless, eyeless. Every head in the lobby slowly turned toward him. Every faceless guest stared. He staggered back, gripping the doorframe, but the door he came from was gone, replaced instantly by patterned wallpaper. Someone stepped toward him, then another. He felt the air tighten, the lobby growing smaller by the second. The faceless crowd began moving in his direction, silent and synchronized, reaching for him. The faceless crowd closed in. No footsteps, no voices, only the unnatural hush of bodies moving where sound should exist. Their blank heads tilted toward him as if trying to remember what expressions were, or how to wear them again. He stumbled backward until his shoulder hit the front counter. The wood felt warm beneath his palm, too warm, as if someone had just been standing there seconds before. A silver bell sat atop the desk, polished, gleaming. The crowd froze. Every faceless head turned toward the bell. He didn't know why he did it. Maybe instinct, maybe desperation, but his trembling fingers lifted and tapped it. Ding! The sound rang out, impossibly loud, like a single drop hitting the surface of a bottomless well. The lights flickered. The lobby dissolved. For a heartbeat, he was nowhere, only suspended in a void so quiet it felt like the world had forgotten to exist. Then the motel reformed, but now it was the version he had first found, abandoned, dust-filled, dead. The faceless crowd was gone. He stood alone in the ruined lobby, chest heaving, hands shaking so violently he couldn't keep them at his sides. The bell was still there, but tarnished, rusted, as if decades had passed in the blink he fell through. Behind him, a soft creak echoed. He turned slowly. At the far end of the lobby, beneath a collapsed chandelier, stood a single figure. Just one. Not faceless. A man. His clothing belonged to another era, something from the 1950s. A bellhop uniform, faded and torn, the brass buttons dulled, the name tag half broken. The man's face flickered like old film struggling to stay intact. "You rang?" he said. The voice was distorted, not monstrous, not ghostly, but sad, unbearably sad, as if he'd forgotten how to speak to anyone real. The man took a step forward. "This place remembers everyone who stays." He gestured slowly around the lobby. All those who checked in, but never checked out. The survivor swallowed hard, stepping back. "I'm not staying," he whispered. The bellhop's head tilted. "You already are." A soft creaking sounded above. He looked up. Keys. Hundreds of tarnished room keys hung from rusted hooks behind the counter. More than the motel could ever have had. They swayed gently, clinking together like wind chimes. One by one, they began to fall. Tink, tink, tink. Each key landing on the counter, sliding toward him as if drawn by invisible hands. The bellhop extended his own hand, palm open. "For you," he said. "Room 217. You left your things inside." He shook his head violently. "I never had a room here." "You all say that." The bellhop stepped closer. His eyes, pale, washed-out blue, finally came into focus for the first time. They weren't empty. They were exhausted, trapped. A spark flickered in the survivor's mind. The second figure he'd seen in the nightmare room. The version of himself sitting on the couch. The sense that he'd been duplicated. "Why me?" he whispered. The bellhop glanced around the ruined lobby as if the building itself were listening. "Because you looked inside," he said softly. "And this place opens to those who look too long." He reached out with the rusty key. The survivor backed away, then turned and sprinted toward the exit doors. They were closer than he remembered. Just 20 feet. 10. He slammed into them. They didn't budge. The wood was solid, the glass unbroken. But the world outside looked wrong, like a postcard photograph instead of reality. No wind, no sound, no movement. A painted world, a world he couldn't reach. Behind him, footsteps echoed. Slow, measured, familiar. He turned. The bellhop was gone. Someone else stood in his place. Himself. The same version he had seen sitting on the couch, same clothes, same face, same hollow stare. This version stepped forward, hand outstretched, as if offering to take his place in the doorway. Or perhaps to take something else. His voice was flat, the words falling from his own lips like dead leaves. "You should rest," The room is ready." "No," was all he managed, breath trembling. The double stepped closer. "You're tired," it said. "Everyone who comes here is tired." The lights dimmed, the walls breathed, the world folded inward. He felt the floor shift, the air thicken, and with one final surge of panicked clarity, he struck the exit door with his shoulder a second time, harder, with everything he had. The glass cracked. For an instant, he saw real sky behind it, real wind, real freedom. He threw himself at it again. The door exploded outward. Cold night air slammed into him, nearly knocking him off his feet. He stumbled into the rain-soaked parking lot, gasping, turning back toward the motel, and saw only darkness. The building was gone. No lights, no windows, no structure. Only an empty lot filled with weeds and broken concrete, as if nothing had stood there for 50 years. He collapsed onto the asphalt. The rain fell harder. He didn't know how long he sat there before headlights appeared on the horizon. A passing truck. The driver saw him, pulled over, jumped out shouting, "Sir, are you okay?" He tried to answer, but something was clenched in his fist. He looked down. The key, room 217. Rusty, cold, and with his name etched crudely onto the metal. Emily Blake moved into her new home on a cold, indifferent afternoon, the kind of day that feels unfinished no matter how much sunlight it gets. The town of Overton Ridge wasn't big, just a quiet patch of winding streets, aging maples, and houses that seemed to lean slightly inward, as if sharing secrets. It was the sort of town where the mail arrived early, the neighbors waved from their porches, and nothing truly bad was supposed to happen. Or so she hoped. After the divorce and the choking pressure of the city, she needed silence. Her therapist called it resetting the nervous system. Emily called it survival. The house she found was older than she preferred. A narrow, two-story home with creaking floors and wallpaper that had surrendered its color decades ago. But it felt safe, or at least safe enough. Across the street stood another house, much older, dark brown and sharp-edged, like something carved rather than built. The windows were tall and bare, without curtains, blinking like hollow eyes. She noticed it immediately, not because it was unusual, but because it felt strangely present, as if it had been waiting for her. She wasn't the first to warn herself not to think too much about it. By evening, she met her neighbor, Mrs. Harrow, a thin, almost translucent woman wrapped in a beige sweater that looked older than the street itself. She walked with the slow certainty of someone who had lived too long and seen too much. "You're the one moving in," she said, her voice soft but brittle. "Just remember one thing, dear. Whatever you do, don't look at the third window of that house." Emily let out a short, unsure laugh, thinking it was a joke. But the woman didn't smile. "In that house," she clarified gently, pointing with a trembling finger. "The third one from the left on the second floor. Keep your curtains closed at night. And for God's sake, don't look back if something catches your attention." Emily wanted to ask why, but the neighbor was already turning away, muttering something she couldn't quite hear. Something about the window choosing people. The first night settled early. The town fell into a stillness that felt almost staged. Emily unpacked slowly, arranging dishes, books, and the few pieces of furniture she had left. The silence was comforting at first, a soft, steady hum that filled the background like a blanket. But by midnight, she noticed something strange. Whenever she passed by the living room window, the house across the street seemed brighter. Not fully lit, just a faint, almost imperceptible glow from the second floor. A low light, like a candle or a dying bulb. It flickered once, then went completely dark. Emily stared at it a moment longer, waiting for movement she couldn't explain, wanting to see. Nothing. She closed the curtains, convincing herself it was just her imagination. A trick of the streetlight. Fatigue. Stress. Anything but what it felt like. But later, while brushing her teeth, she glanced out the bathroom window and froze. In the third window of the house opposite, a shape stood perfectly still. Too tall, too centered, too aware. It didn't move, didn't shift, didn't fade. It was simply there. Her heartbeat thudded against her ribs. She stepped back, shutting off the light, convinced she must have seen wrong. And yet, even in the darkness, she felt an unmistakable weight, the sensation of being looked at. She didn't sleep much that night. In the morning, sunlight washed the house across the street, revealing nothing unusual. No silhouette, no signs of life. The window was empty, almost aggressively so. But on her own window, trapped faintly in the thin layer of condensation, she saw the shape of a handprint. Not big, not small, just wrong. She hadn't touched that window. She knew she hadn't. And yet someone, or something, had. Emily tried to ignore the handprint. She wiped it away with the sleeve of her sweater and convinced herself it must have been left by the movers, or maybe even the previous owner. But even as she scrubbed it clean, she felt a crawling unease along her spine. Not fear exactly, but an intrusive awareness, like being watched by something patient. The day passed quietly, too quietly. Overton Ridge wasn't lively to begin with, but today the silence felt heavier, as though the entire street was holding its breath. Emily unpacked the rest of her boxes, set up her small desk by the window, and made a half-hearted attempt to plan a new routine. But no matter how she tried, her attention kept drifting across the road to the old house. Its windows reflected nothing but sky. Its porch sagged under decades of neglect. And still, she couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't empty. In the afternoon, she forced herself to step outside. Fresh air helped, until she noticed Mrs. Harrow sweeping her porch with slow, deliberate strokes, her eyes fixed on the house across the street. Emily approached, trying to sound casual. "Does anyone live there?" "No," the old woman said immediately, without even glancing at her. "No one you should concern yourself with." "You made it sound like—" "I meant what I said." Mrs. Harrow's voice sharpened, surprising Emily. "That window. It doesn't like being noticed. Don't give it attention. People who do don't stay long." Emily opened her mouth to ask more, but Mrs. Harrow turned her back, ending the conversation as abruptly as it started. Emily walked home unsettled, feeling more like an intruder than a neighbour. By sunset, the air had cooled and the street seemed to sink into a deeper stillness. Emily cooked a simple dinner, opened a bottle of wine she'd been saving for no occasion in particular, and tried to relax. She put on a movie, something light, something safe, but halfway through she found herself glancing towards the living room curtains. They moved, just slightly. A gentle sway as if someone had brushed a hand along the fabric from the other side. She froze, then told herself it was a draft. It had to be a draft. Still, she walked over cautiously and held the edge of the curtain between her fingers. The fabric was cold, much colder than the air in the room. She hesitated, then pulled the curtain open just enough to peek out. Nothing. The street was empty, but the house across the road wasn't as dark as before. A faint glow again pulsed behind the third window. Not steady, but slow, like breathing. A cold wave rolled through her chest. She closed the curtain quickly and retreated to the middle of the room, gripping her wineglass too tightly.
The movie kept playing, but the sound seemed distant now, swallowed by the tension crawling through her ribs. When she finally went to bed, exhaustion pulled her under within minutes. For the first time since she moved in, she slept deeply, until a soft sound woke her. A faint tap, then another, rhythmic, delicate, like fingertips, tapping on glass. Her eyes snapped open. The sound came from the living room. She didn't want to check. Everything in her body told her to stay in bed.
But something stronger, a stubborn sense of not wanting to be afraid in her own home, pushed her to get up. The tapping continued, steady as a heartbeat, guiding her like a thread. She stepped into the living room. The curtains were still closed. The tapping was coming from behind them. Her pulse hammered in her ears. She forced herself to reach out, pinching the curtain's edge between shaking fingers. She pulled slowly, an inch at a time, until her view opened to the street outside. And immediately, she felt her blood turn to ice. In the third window of the house across the street, the figure was back, perfectly still, perfectly centered, as if waiting for her. Only now it wasn't a silhouette. It had shape, detail, a human shape, standing inches from the glass. Emily's breath hitched. She stepped back instinctively, and the figure, though motionless, seemed to lean forward, as if reacting to her movement. She shut the curtain hard, stumbling away from the window. The tapping stopped instantly. Silence flooded the room, thick and suffocating. Then, after a full minute of dead stillness, came a new sound. Not tapping, not scratching. A single, soft knock from the inside of her home. On the wall directly behind her. Emily closed her eyes. She wasn't imagining things. Not anymore. Someone, or something, was inside the house. Emily didn't move at first. She stood in the center of the dark living room, barely breathing, listening to the silence press against her from all sides. The knock had been soft, almost polite, but that only made it worse. A threat whispered instead of shouted. Her mind raced through explanations, rational and irrational. An animal? A branch? The house settling? No. Nothing alive outside could knock from inside her wall. She forced herself to turn slowly toward the sound. The wall behind her was blank, freshly painted, completely solid. No door, no window, no pipe large enough for anything human. Another knock, this time a little sharper, directly behind the drywall. Emily stepped back until her heel hit the leg of the couch. She didn't dare speak. Every instinct she had screamed that acknowledging the sound would be a mistake, that whatever was knocking wanted her attention far too much. When the knock didn't come again, she backed away, inch by inch, until she reached her bedroom door. She slipped inside, closed it quietly, and locked it. The lock felt laughably small, like a toy latch on a cardboard box, but it was something. The night stretched on endlessly. She sat on the edge of her bed, gripping the phone in her hand. Call someone, she told herself. Call anyone. But who? The police? What would she even report? There's knocking inside my walls, and a figure in a window that shouldn't exist? No. She needed evidence. Something real, tangible. Something more than the wild fear curling in her stomach. Eventually, exhaustion pulled her into an uneasy sleep. She dreamt of footsteps walking circles around her bed, soft and deliberate, always just out of sight. She woke at dawn with the uneasy sense of being watched. The house was silent, but not peacefully so. More like it was waiting. Emily went to the kitchen to make coffee, hoping routine would ground her. But when she reached for a mug, she froze. There, on the surface of the cabinet door, was a mark. A smear. Long, vertical. As if fingers coated in dust or ash had dragged downward. She backed away quickly, heart hammering. This wasn't from her. She hadn't touched that cabinet at all yesterday. Something had. She left the mug where it was and stepped into the living room. The curtains remained closed, just as she'd left them. She almost didn't want to open them. Almost. But fear of the unknown was worse than seeing the thing directly. She pulled the curtain just an inch. The house across the street looked the same as always. Lifeless. Empty. The third window was dark again. No figure. No light. No movement. But something new made her stomach drop. The glass on that window, the old, dusty, untouched glass, now had something written on it. A single word, drawn with the stroke of a fingertip. Emily. Her knees went weak. Someone in that house, something, knew her name. She let the curtain fall shut, backing away fast enough that she bumped into the coffee table, sending a stack of magazines sliding to the floor. She barely noticed. She needed answers, not guesses, not stories. Answers. Mrs. Harrow. The old woman clearly knew something. Emily grabbed her coat and raced outside, the cold air hitting her like a slap. She crossed the street and climbed the neighbor's porch steps 2 at a time. But before she knocked on the door, she heard a voice behind her. "You shouldn't stand out here." Emily turned sharply. Mrs. Harrow was already outside, standing on the edge of her porch, clutching a wrapped shawl around her thin frame. Emily hadn't even heard the door open. "Please," Emily said, her voice thin with panic. "You have to tell me what's going on. Someone's in that house. Someone wrote my name." "No," Mrs. Harrow interrupted firmly. "Not someone. Not in any way you're thinking." Emily stared at her. "What is it then?" The old woman hesitated, truly hesitated, as if saying the words might bring something closer. Then finally, quietly, she said, "That window doesn't show who lives in that house. It shows who the house wants." Emily felt cold all over. "Wants? What does that mean?" Mrs. Harrow stepped closer, lowering her voice. "There were others before you. People who noticed the window. People who looked too long. It doesn't bother everyone. Only the ones who fit its pattern." Emily swallowed hard. "What pattern?" "I don't know. I only know what happens. First, the window watches. Then, it imitates. Then, it chooses." "Chooses what?" "You," the old woman said. "Or rather, a version of you." Emily's mind spun. Her stomach dropped. Imitates. She thought of the shadow in the window, its shape, its stillness, its unnerving way of reacting to her movement. It hadn't been watching her. It had been studying her. Before she could speak, Mrs. Harrow grabbed her wrist with surprising force. "Emily, listen carefully. Once the window knows your name, it doesn't stop. You must not engage with it again. Not look at it, not acknowledge it. Don't give it the chance to finish what it started." Emily pulled her hand free, feeling a sharp spike of fear. "What happens if I do?" The old woman stared at her with hollow, exhausted eyes. "Then what stands in the window stops being your reflection and starts being your replacement." Emily didn't remember walking home. One moment she was standing on Mrs. Harrow's porch, the old woman's trembling voice echoing in her ears. The next, she was inside her own living room, coat still on, breath uneven, as if her body had acted without her permission. Replacement. The word clung to her like frost. She paced the room, trying to think, trying to ground herself in logic. But every logical explanation collapsed under the weight of last night's events. The knocking, the figure, her name written in dust. And now, the idea that something across the street wasn't just watching her, it was learning her. She stopped in the center of the room and realized something. The house felt wrong. Not just eerie, but subtly rearranged, like someone had tried to copy her space and got it slightly, unnervingly incorrect. The lamp on the end table was angled differently. Her books on the coffee table weren't stacked the same way she left them. And the rug, she stepped back, was off by an inch. Just 1 inch, nothing a normal person would notice. But she noticed, because she hadn't moved it. Something had been in here. She backed away until her shoulders pressed against the bedroom door. That was when she heard it. A soft, faint scrape coming from the ceiling. Long, slow, dragging. Her breath hitched. Above her bedroom was nothing but a sealed crawl space. No access, no ladder, no reason for anyone or anything to be up there. The scraping continued, mapping the outline of her room from above, tracing the perimeter like someone crawling just under the surface. She forced herself to step into the bedroom. The air felt colder here, closer, thicker. She didn't turn on the light. Every instinct told her not to draw attention. The scraping paused, right above her head. Emily held her breath. 10 seconds passed, 20. Then, with a sudden, violent jolt, something slammed against the ceiling. A single impact, a fist, or a head, right above her. Dust drifted down like falling ash. Emily stumbled backward, slamming into the dresser. Her heart thundered against her ribs as she grabbed her phone with shaking hands. She didn't care if it sounded insane anymore. She needed help. She dialed 911. The ringing barely lasted 2 seconds before the call failed. No signal, not even one bar. She stared at the screen, horrified. Her phone wasn't just out of service. It showed a notification she'd never seen before. Network error. Device ID not recognized. She swallowed hard. Her own phone didn't recognize her. Minutes dragged by. The ceiling stayed silent. Eventually, Emily stepped back into the hallway, pulse finally beginning to steady. She needed to leave the house. It didn't matter where she went. She just needed distance, sunlight, other people. She walked toward the front door and froze. The door was open, only an inch, but she knew she had locked it. Slowly, she approached, her hand trembling as she reached for the knob. Before she touched it, she saw something on the inside surface of the door. Another smear, vertical, finger-shaped, the same as the one on her kitchen cabinet. Only this one was bigger, longer. It dragged all the way down to the floor. Her breath stuttered. Her vision swam. She turned around, slowly, because she suddenly felt watched again. Not from outside, from inside. The living room was dim, the curtains still drawn, but the shape of her own silhouette stretched across the wall in front of her. Except the light behind her wasn't bright enough to cast a shadow like that, and the shadow wasn't matching her movement. She stepped right. The shadow did not. She stepped left. It stayed still. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, the shadow lifted its head. Even though Emily was standing frozen, head lowered, not breathing. Her blood turned to ice. The shadow straightened, taller than her, shoulders sharper, its head tilted with a slow, unnatural grace, as if testing the range of a new body. And then, it raised its hand. A long, thin hand, and the shadow's palm pressed flat against the wall, right where the smear had been earlier, as if matching the gesture of whatever had dragged its fingers down the door. Emily stumbled backward. She blinked, and the shadow vanished. Gone. Completely. Her pulse hammered in her skull. She backed toward the door, hand shaking uncontrollably as she fumbled with the lock. She needed out, needed air. A soft, gentle knock sounded behind her. Not from the door, not from the wall, from the living room window. Her heart stopped. She turned slowly, dread crawling up her spine like ice water. The curtain was still drawn, but a faint silhouette pressed against the fabric from the outside. A human silhouette, but wrong. Too thin, too tall, too familiar. It raised a hand, the same long, thin hand, and tapped the glass once. Just once. Then she heard a whisper, muffled, distorted, coming from the other side of the window, and yet somehow from inside her house at the same time. A whisper in her own voice. "Emily, let me in." Emily didn't answer the whisper, but the sound of her own stolen voice seeped through the window pane like cold air, curling around her skin and sinking into her bones. She stepped backward, pulse sharp and frantic, the whisper repeating again, softer, closer, as if the glass were thinning. She stumbled toward the back of the house, heart jackhammering as the temperature dropped, the floorboards creaking beneath her feet in slow, deliberate patterns that didn't match her own steps. She reached the kitchen, then froze. The back door, locked that morning, now stood open by a narrow, unnatural sliver, as though someone had slipped inside and left it ajar in invitation. A faint draft slid past her, carrying the scent of wet earth, dust, and something older, something wrong, like the breath of an empty room that had learned how to inhale. Emily shut the door with trembling hands, her fingers brushing a new smear, another long, finger-shaped mark dragging downward from the midpoint of the door to the floor, as if whatever had touched it had paused, thinking, learning. Her lungs tightened. She backed away until her hips hit the counter, and the house seemed to lean inward with her, the air thickening, pressing against her from every angle. Then she heard it again, a whisper, not from the window this time, but from the hallway behind her, closer now, almost inside her ear. "Emily, let me be you." She spun around, but the hallway was empty, yet the shadow cast on the far wall was not. It was her shape, her outline, but stretched taller, its arms too long, its posture too rigid, as if trying to fit into the idea of a human form and getting the dimensions just slightly wrong. It tilted its head, an echo of a movement she hadn't made, its silhouette rippling as though made of thick smoke struggling to hold a shape. Emily stepped backward, but the shadow stepped forward, not in sync, not mimicking, but advancing with intent. The lights flickered violently, darkness strobing across the hallway until the shadow vanished, only to appear an instant later much closer, inches from her. Though it remained a flat impossibility on the wall, the air grew heavy, charged, as if the house were exhaling around her, walls flexing with unseen breath. Emily ran. She sprinted to the front door, fingers clawing at the lock, twisting it, yanking it open with a crack of wood as cold daylight flooded in. She bolted outside barefoot, gravel biting into her skin, lungs burning as she fled across the porch and into the road, until she stopped dead. The house across the street, the house with the third window, was no longer dark. Every window was lit with a warm, golden glow, as though a family lived inside and had been living there all along. Slowly, mechanically, the curtains of the third window parted. A face leaned into view. Her face, but not hers. The expression was wrong, sewn into a permanent half-smile that didn't touch the eyes that were too wide, too focused, studying her like prey. The other Emily rested one palm against the inside of the glass, and there, written beneath it, on the fogged surface of the window, was a new word. Stay. Emily staggered back, pulse roaring in her ears, but before she could run, something brushed her shoulder. She turned, slowly, dread pooling in her stomach. Mrs. Harrow stood behind her, pale, shaking, eyes filled with brittle pity. "It's too late," the old woman whispered. "Once it finishes learning you, there must be two. One inside, one outside. It decides who belongs where." Emily's breath faltered. "Which one am I?" she asked, her voice breaking. Mrs. Harrow swallowed. Her gaze slid to the house behind Emily. Its front door, still open, slowly, softly, quietly began to close on its own. "I'm not sure," she said. Emily turned sharply toward her own doorway, heart plummeting. For a split second, just before the door shut completely, she saw a figure standing in the darkness inside. A figure with her shape, her posture, her silhouette, watching her, waiting, and smiling her smile. The door clicked shut. The house across the street went dark, and Emily finally understood. One of them had been chosen, but she didn't know which one she was. A motel is sometimes less a place and more a feeling, a pause between one part of a life and the next. But what happens when the pause becomes permanent? When the room you rent for a night decides to keep you? When it learns the memories you've spent a lifetime trying to forget and asks you to live them again? This is a story about a place like that. A place that a man named Alex found one night, when the road behind him had finally become longer than the road ahead. The life Alex left behind hadn't so much collapsed as it had quietly dissolved. A business, a relationship, a series of choices that had worn him down to a whisper. So he packed what was left into a single bag, filled his tank with gas, and just drove. There was no destination, only the need to see a different version of himself in the reflection of a rearview mirror. He'd been pushing west for 2 days, the state lines blurring into one another through a haze of diner coffee and profound exhaustion. The sun was bleeding its last light over the flat, empty horizon when the engine began to sputter. He coasted, the silence growing louder, until the car rolled to a stop in the gravel lot of the only structure he'd seen for 100 miles. A motel. It wasn't just old, it was an afterthought. The neon sign, a ghost of a starburst, had letters missing, so it read simply, Starlight OL. A single bulb over the office door flickered, casting shadows that danced like living things. There was one other car in the lot, a sedan from another era, covered in a film of dust so thick it looked like it had grown there. A sense of deep, unnatural isolation pressed in on him. The kind of quiet that feels like a pocket of forgotten time, completely severed from the world. Every instinct told him to risk the empty highway, to sleep in his car until morning. But the exhaustion was a physical weight in his bones. He needed rest. The office was empty. A small bell sat on the counter next to a heavy, leather-bound guest book, whose pages were yellowed and brittle. He tapped the bell. The sound was sharp, almost violent in the silence. After a moment that stretched too long, a door behind the counter sighed open, and an old man emerged. He was impossibly thin, his skin like old parchment. He didn't speak. He just pushed the guest book forward. Alex signed his name, paid with the cash he had, and the man passed him a key on a heavy brass tag. Room 7. The room was a continuation of the stillness outside. The bedspread was a faded floral, the carpet worn down to its threads in pathways etched by strangers. The air was heavy with the smell of dust and something else, something metallic and vaguely sad, like old, forgotten tools. The only window looked out onto a solid brick wall. It was a box made for forgetting. Alex slid the chain across the door, the sound of it loud and final, and fell onto the bed without taking off his clothes. Sleep found him instantly, but it wasn't the peace he was looking for. Alex woke up to a darkness that felt different, deeper. His heart was a frantic drum against his ribs. He couldn't name what had woken him, maybe a sound from a dream that had followed him out. He sat up, swinging his legs over the edge of the bed, and his feet met the floor. It was wrong. Not the scratchy, worn carpet he expected, but cool, slick concrete. And it was damp. His fingers fumbled in the dark for the lamp, tracing its shape until he found the switch. A weak, yellow light filled the room. He looked down. The floor was dark with moisture, and the air, once just dusty, was now thick with the chemical bite of chlorine. It was the smell of the town pool from his childhood, the smell of the summer he turned 8, the summer his friend Marc held his head under the water just a few seconds too long. The burning in his lungs, the sheer, blind panic of it. He shook his head, a slow, disbelieving motion. A plumbing issue, he told himself. A leak. He stood up, the cold concrete clinging to his feet, and as he did, he heard it. Faint, distant, like a sound carried on the wind from a long way off. A child's laughter. It sounded just like Marc. Alex went still, every part of him listening. He tried to reason it away, the old pipes, the wind, but the sound had been too real. He strained to hear it again, but there was only the low rattle of the air conditioner. He crossed to the bathroom and pushed the door open. The floor inside was bone dry. He backed away slowly, his eyes scanning the little room. Nothing had moved. The damp patch on the floor was still there, but maybe he'd just been too tired to see it when he came in. The smell of chlorine was already fading, giving way again to the scent of dust. He was exhausted, his mind playing tricks on him. That's all it could be. He lay back on the thin mattress, but he kept his eyes open, staring at the ceiling, at the old water stains that looked like maps of places no one had ever been. And for the first time, he felt it. A pressure in the quiet. The feeling of being watched. An hour passed, maybe 2. Sleep was no longer an option. Every groan of the building, every sigh of the plumbing, was a fresh tremor of fear. He decided then he couldn't stay. He didn't care about the money. He'd sleep in his car. He stood and reached for his jacket on the chair. When he turned back to the bed, he froze. The wall opposite him, where the cheap painting of a seascape had been, was gone. In its place was a wall covered in faded yellow wallpaper, patterned with small, smiling cartoon bears. His breath caught in his throat. It was the wallpaper from his bedroom when he was a child. He just stared, his mind unable to build a bridge to what he was seeing. He could even make out the small, clumsy scribble of his own name in green crayon near the baseboard, a relic of being 5 years old. It wasn't a dream. It felt too solid, too real. He took one slow step forward, reaching out a hand that trembled. He had to touch it, to prove it was a hallucination. As his fingers drew near, the air around the wall grew cold, and just before he could make contact, a voice moved through the room. "Alex? Is that you, sweetheart?" It was his mother's voice. His mother, who had been gone for 10 years. A choked sound, half sob, escaped him. He stumbled backward, hitting the small desk by the window. His mind felt like it was fracturing. He squeezed his eyes shut. "You're not real," he whispered into the impossible silence. "You're not real." When he opened them, the wallpaper was gone. The ugly seascape hung on the cracked plaster wall again, but the cold in the air remained, a pocket of unnatural chill. And the memory of her voice was a fresh wound. This wasn't his imagination. The motel was doing this. The building was reaching into his head and pulling out the things he had buried the deepest. He had to get out. He scrambled for the door, his hands shaking too much to work the lock properly. He finally wrestled the chain free, turned the knob, and threw the door open, lunging for the hallway. But the hallway wasn't there. There was only a solid, unmoving darkness, a void that seemed to drink the light from his room and give nothing back. He fell backward, the air knocked from his lungs, a prisoner. The motel had him. Panic, raw and absolute, took hold. He was in a cage, a predator, and it was still hungry. As if summoned by the thought, the room began to shift again. The smell of chlorine returned, stronger now, but mixed with something else. The acrid smell of burnt rubber and gasoline. The low hum of the air conditioner was swallowed by the deafening screech of tires on pavement, then the sickening final sound of metal tearing itself apart. The lights flickered, and in the strobing flashes, the wall with the window dissolved. He wasn't looking at brick anymore. He was looking at the grill of a semi-truck, its headlights like two blazing suns, coming right for him. It was the last thing he'd seen in the accident. The crash that had taken his fiancée, Chloe. The sound was a physical thing, shaking the floor beneath him. Alex screamed, a raw, useless sound, and threw his arms over his face. He braced for the impact, for the pain he remembered so well. But it never came. Seconds stretched on, and the sound faded. The blinding light vanished. He slowly lowered his arms. The room was just a room again. The window was back, showing only the dark bricks outside. The air still carried the ghost of gasoline. His breaths were ragged, shallow. The motel was moving through his life, picking his tragedies like flowers. A childhood fear, a mother's ghost, a love lost in a moment of violence. And he knew, with a certainty that was colder than any fear he had yet felt, what it was saving for last. The one memory he had built his entire life around outrunning. The temperature in the room dropped. Frost began to spiderweb across the window pane. The stained carpet beneath his feet softened, thickened, becoming the blue shag rug of his family's living room from 15 years ago. An old, boxy television appeared against the far wall. A small pile of red and blue Lego bricks materialized in the center of the floor. Alex knew this place. He knew this silence. He knew the smell of lemon polish and the exact way the afternoon sun used to fall across this floor. "Can we build the spaceship now, Alex?" The voice was small. It came from right beside him. Alex turned his head, slowly. A sound of pure anguish caught in his throat. Sitting on the floor, holding a single red Lego, was a little boy with his own face, his own blue eyes. His brother, Leo, 6 years old. "Leo," Alex breathed, the name a broken thing. The little boy looked up at him, his face filled with a perfect, trusting innocence. "You promised," he said, holding out the brick, "before Mom and Dad get home." "I know," Alex whispered, tears blurring the impossible sight of his brother. "I know I did." He had been 14, in charge for 1 hour. They were building a spaceship. The phone rang. A friend, a video game. He told Leo to wait. Don't touch the new pieces. He was gone for 5 minutes. When he came back, the sliding glass door was open, and Leo was at the bottom of the pool. He hadn't even heard a splash. Now, in this cursed room, the memory was playing out in every torturous detail. The small boy on the floor stood up, his eyes fixed on the wall behind the television. The wall shimmered and dissolved, revealing the sun-drenched patio, the impossible blue of the swimming pool from his childhood home. "Leo, no!" Alex pleaded, scrambling to his feet. "Don't, please!" The boy didn't seem to hear. He just walked toward the shimmering image of the backyard. "Leo, stop!" Alex screamed, lunging to grab him, but his hands passed through nothing, through cold air. This was the motel's real cruelty. Not just to make him watch, but to make him helpless all over again. He could feel the room feeding on his despair, a vast and ancient awareness focusing on him, drawing strength from his agony. The image of Leo reached the edge of the phantom pool. He looked down into the water. Alex fell to his knees, sobbing. "I'm sorry," he cried out, the words torn from a place he'd kept locked away for 15 years. "Leo, I'm so sorry. It was my fault. I should have been watching. I'm so sorry." He covered his face, unable to see what he already knew. He waited for the sound of a memory that had haunted every quiet moment of his life, but it didn't come. After a long silence, he felt a small hand on his shoulder. He looked up. The specter of his brother was standing before him. The pool, the living room, it was all gone. It was just the boy in the center of the dusty motel room. And his expression was no longer blank. It was filled with a sad, impossible wisdom. And then he smiled, a small, forgiving smile. The moment he smiled, something in the room broke. A high, whining sound filled the air, and the walls seemed to vibrate. The suffocating presence that had been pressing in on Alex recoiled, as if it had touched fire. The motel fed on regret, on guilt. But in that whispered, broken confession, Alex had offered something else. Acceptance. Forgiveness. It was a frequency the place couldn't tune to, a light that scattered its particular darkness. The image of Leo began to fade, the red brick in his hand, the last thing to dissolve into the air. The shag carpet receded, revealing the stained floor beneath. The groaning of the walls went silent. The cold was gone. Alex was on his hands and knees in the middle of room 7, panting, drenched in sweat. The room was just a room again, dirty, dilapidated, and blessedly ordinary. He looked at the door. The wall of darkness was gone. Through the opening, he could see the dimly lit hallway. He didn't think. He didn't grab his bag. He scrambled to his feet and ran. He fled down the corridor, through the office, and out into the pre-dawn quiet of the parking lot. He didn't look back. His hands, still shaking, found his keys. He threw himself into the driver's seat. The engine, dead for hours, turned over on the first try with a shudder. He slammed the car into reverse and tore out of the gravel lot, speeding onto the dark, empty highway. He drove until the sun began to rise, painting the horizon in soft colors. He finally risked a look in his rearview mirror. The road behind him was empty. There was no sign of a motel. It was as if it had been erased by the daylight. A wave of relief, so total and absolute, washed over him. It was over. He drove another 50 miles before pulling over to the side of the road, his body trembling. He rested his head against the steering wheel, just breathing in the silence. He was free. Then he glanced at the passenger seat. His heart went still. Sitting on the worn fabric, catching the first light of the new morning, was a single, small, red Lego brick. Have you ever been in a place that seemed to be listening? A room that held the echoes of all the lives that had passed through it. The line between the world and our own memory is thinner than we think. And sometimes, in the quietest corners of the map, you can find a place that knows how to cross it. The sign used to say, "The Ridgeway Hotel, established 1927. Now the letters are cracked, half of them missing. Only "The Way" still glows in faint neon when the generator decides to work. The Ridgeway stands alone on a forgotten road in northern Colorado. Once it was a mountain retreat, marble floors, grand chandeliers, a ballroom that looked out over the pines. Now, it's nothing more than dust and echoes. And for the last 3 years, it's been home to one person. Her name is Claire Warren, 30 years old, cleaner, caretaker, and the last employee of a hotel that officially closed a decade ago. Every morning, Claire unlocks the front doors, even though no one ever walks through them. She sweeps the lobby, wipes the counter, checks the mail slot where nothing has arrived since 2014. It's not really a job anymore. It's just routine, the only thing keeping her from thinking too much. Sometimes she tells herself she's staying because of the paycheck. The property owner still sends money, enough to keep the lights running on the first floor. Other times, she admits the truth. She stays because she's afraid to leave. The Ridgeway has a way of doing that to people. Locals say the hotel was cursed long before it was abandoned. Back in the 1950s, a guest went missing. A woman traveling alone, just like Claire. Her name was Evelyn Hart. She checked into room 313 one evening and was never seen again. When the staff went to look for her, the room was spotless. Bed made, suitcase gone, not a single fingerprint left. The only clue was a note at the front desk that said, "Thank you for the room. I won't be checking out." After that, guests began to complain of whispers in the walls, cold spots in the hallways. Some swore they saw a woman standing at the end of the corridor, just standing there, smiling faintly, before disappearing. Claire doesn't believe in ghosts, or at least she tells herself she doesn't. She's cleaned every room in this place. She's seen the mold, the rot, the wiring that hums through the walls. She knows the whispers are just bad insulation. Still, sometimes, when she walks past room 313, even though it's supposed to be sealed shut, she could swear she hears something. like breathing. At night, the hotel changes. The silence becomes heavier, thicker, like the air itself is watching. She started to notice small things. Doors that are open when she's certain she closed them. Lights flickering in rooms with no power. And once, just once, the old elevator moving on its own. There's no one else here. There can't be. But every time she passes the front desk, the guest book is open to a new page. Fresh ink. Names she doesn't recognize. Dates that haven't happened yet. There's a story the townspeople tell, that the Ridgeway was built on top of an older foundation. Before it was a hotel, it was a sanatorium. Before that, a mining camp. And before that, no one really knows. The ground remembers, they say, and sometimes the walls do too. Claire's shift ends at midnight, but lately she's been staying later and later. She says it's because she can't sleep, but the truth is, she started to dream of the hotel even when she's awake. Every corridor looks the same now. Every door seems to lead back to the same place. And sometimes, when she catches her reflection in the dark glass of the lobby windows, it doesn't look like her anymore. They say you can't lose your mind somewhere that's already empty. But they've never stayed at the Ridgeway. Nights at the Ridgeway always begin the same way. A storm outside. A clock that doesn't work, but somehow still ticks. And that feeling, the one Claire could never explain. Like the building itself is waiting for something. She tells herself she doesn't believe in ghosts. But after so many nights alone, she's learned that silence can sound a lot like someone breathing beside you. The lights on the third floor never worked right. Sometimes they'd flicker for a second, just long enough for her to think she saw someone standing at the end of the corridor. And then, total darkness. That night, she was cleaning near the old ballroom, a place that hadn't seen a guest since 1981. Broken chandeliers, dust-covered mirrors, the smell of wet carpet and rust. She was humming to herself, trying to fill the silence, when she heard it. Claire froze. There was no fourth floor. Not anymore. She took a breath, looked up at the ceiling, and saw dust falling. Just a few particles drifting down, like someone was walking right above her. Then the footsteps started again. Closer. And now they were behind her. Claire spun around, heart pounding so hard it hurt. The corridor behind her was empty. Nothing but flickering light and peeling wallpaper. But something had changed. The air smelled different. Sharp, metallic, like wet coins. And there was a sound. She followed it. The sound was coming from the old suite, room 312, the one next to the one that didn't exist. Claire whispered to herself, "Just the wind. It's just the wind." But the air in the room didn't move. It felt still, heavy. She noticed something odd. The mirror above the dresser wasn't dusty like everything else. It looked freshly cleaned. She stepped closer. Her reflection looked normal at first. Tired, pale, hair tied back. But then, behind her reflection, in the mirror, there was a door. Except there was no door behind her. Just wall. She turned around. Nothing. When she looked back into the mirror, the door was gone, but her reflection was still facing it. She stumbled backward, knocking over a chair. Her flashlight flickered, and for a second, she thought she saw words scrawled across the wallpaper. Faint, almost invisible under the light. Check-in complete. Then everything went black. When the lights came back, the room was empty again, but there was something new in the hallway. A trail of wet footprints, bare, human, leading away from room 312 and stopping right in front of room 313. You shouldn't be here. They say madness begins with a sound you can't explain. For Claire, it began with footsteps that wouldn't stop following her. By the third week, Claire stopped trying to explain things. The sounds, the footprints, the mirrors that sometimes didn't reflect her at all. She told herself she was just tired, but every night something new appeared. A chair moved. A door that had been sealed for years slightly open. And always, always, those wet footprints. They led to room 313. Every night, every time. The door didn't exist on any blueprint. No number plate, just faded marks on the wallpaper where the metal digits must have been. But she knew. She knew it was there. The handle was cold. Too cold, like metal left outside in the snow. When she turned it, the sound was wrong. Not the squeak of rusted hinges, more like something breathing out. The smell hit first. Not rot, not dust. Something older, like burnt air and rain. Inside, everything was covered in sheets, perfectly arranged. No dust, as if someone had just cleaned. She shone her light across the room. There was furniture, a writing desk, and on the wall, a painting she'd never seen before. A woman, standing in front of the Ridgeway Hotel. Her eyes were dark, her face expressionless. But what froze Claire completely was the detail. In the reflection of the hotel window behind the painted woman, she could see herself. Tiny, blurred, holding a mop. The painting wasn't old. It was new. Fresh brushstrokes, still faintly smelling of oil. She looked down. The footprints were back, wet, leading from the doorway to the bed. And under the bed, something moved. Claire didn't scream. She couldn't. Her voice was gone, stuck somewhere between her chest and the silence around her. The thing under the bed shifted again, and then she saw it. A hand. Small, pale, perfectly still. It wasn't reaching for her. It was pointing to the nightstand. On the nightstand lay the guest book, open, one line written neatly in the center of the page. Claire Warren, checked in 2024. She stared at it for a long time, then turned toward the mirror above the dresser, the same as in every other room. Only this one wasn't reflecting her anymore. It was showing the lobby, the front desk, and behind it, someone standing. She ran, through the hall, down the stairs, the sound of her own footsteps chasing her through the corridors. But the hotel had changed again. Every hallway led to another hallway. Every door opened to the same room, room 313. And somewhere, deep in the dark, the phone kept ringing. Checkout time is over. Some rooms were never meant to be opened, and some guests were never meant to leave. The storm had passed, but the silence it left behind felt heavier than the thunder. The hotel was completely still. The only movement came from the flicker of the hallway lights, stuttering like a dying heartbeat. Claire sat at the front desk, the guest book still open before her, her name written in black ink that hadn't been there yesterday. She tried not to look at it, but the words seemed to breathe on their own, as if the paper itself was alive. She had locked room 313. Twice. She had shoved a chair under the handle, nailed the doorframe shut, even hung a sheet over it, so she wouldn't have to see it anymore. But when she walked past it that morning, the chair was gone. The nails lay scattered across the carpet. The sheet had disappeared. The door was slightly open. She didn't look inside. She couldn't. She just kept walking, pretending she hadn't seen it, pretending the hotel hadn't started to hum. It wasn't a sound, not exactly. More like a vibration under the floorboards, as though the building itself was waking up after a long sleep. At noon, the intercom crackled to life. It hadn't worked in years. The front desk connected to the old staff quarters, but the wires had been cut long before she arrived. Still, the small red light blinked steadily, and then she heard it. A faint voice, barely a whisper. "Housekeeping to room 313. She froze. The words were calm, routine, almost polite, but no one else was here. She stepped closer, her breath fogging the metal speaker. "Who is this?" The static deepened, hissed softly, then broke apart into laughter. Not cruel, not mocking, just wrong. Human, but distant, as if someone were speaking through water. "You're late, Claire." The intercom clicked off. She stood there for a long time, unable to move. Her heart beat too fast. Her throat felt dry. The red light stopped blinking. Everything went still again, like nothing had happened. But when she turned to walk away, something changed in the lobby. The chandelier was lit. She hadn't seen it glow once in 3 years, not even when the generator was running. Now it shone bright and golden, the crystals trembling faintly in the air. And in that light, she saw them. Faint outlines, people in evening clothes, standing perfectly still across the lobby. At first, she thought they were mannequins, but then one of them moved its head. Another raised a glass. The room filled with a soft, impossible music. A melody she couldn't place, old and slow, full of static and dust. The ballroom doors were open again, the same ones she had locked months ago. Claire took a step forward, then another. The air grew colder as she moved closer. The figures began to blur, like smoke trapped in glass. She could see their faces now, pale, distorted. The kind of faces you see in a reflection that isn't yours. One of them turned toward her. It was the woman from the painting, Evelyn Hart. She was smiling, just slightly. Her lips moved, but the sound didn't come from her mouth. It came from the intercom on the wall behind Claire. Check-in complete. Claire backed away, her hands shaking. The figures in the ballroom began to fade, one by one, until only Evelyn remained, standing where no floorboards should exist. Then the chandelier went dark. The music stopped. The room was empty again. She ran to the intercom, ripped the cord from the wall, and threw it across the lobby. But as soon as it hit the ground, it buzzed again, whispering her name over and over, the voice dissolving into static. She didn't sleep that night. She sat by the front desk, watching the empty hallways through the reflection in the lobby's glass door. But something was wrong with the reflection. The clock behind her was moving backward, and in the corner, where the corridor turned toward room 313, she could see a shadow pacing slowly from wall to wall. The next morning, she found a new entry in the guest book. Same name, same handwriting, different date. Tomorrow's. That was when she understood. The hotel wasn't haunted. It was hungry. By the end of that week, Claire had stopped marking the days. The calendar behind the desk still said October 2019, though she knew that couldn't be right. Outside, the sky never changed. It was always evening, a pale, colorless light that pressed itself against the windows like fog. The world beyond the hotel had faded into silence. She tried leaving once. She packed a bag, took the master key, and walked down the long driveway that cut through the trees. The road wound down into nothing. After 10 minutes, she saw the same sign again. The Ridgeway Hotel, established 1927. After 20, the same puddle she'd stepped over before. By 30, she was standing back at the front doors. The key in her hand was gone. She laughed softly, a broken sound that echoed up the marble walls. That night, she lit every lamp on the first floor. The rooms glowed dimly, as if through water. She walked from door to door, whispering to herself that there was nothing there, that she wasn't part of this place. But every door she opened showed the same room, the same bed, the same painting, the same smell of rain and burnt air. Room 313. It didn't matter which handle she touched, they all led there. The hotel had folded in on itself, as though it had chosen only one room to exist. On the bed sat the guest book, open, waiting. She turned a page, blank. Another, blank. The next one wasn't. There was a single line, written in perfect handwriting. "Thank you for your service, Claire. You've kept the rooms so clean." The ink shimmered wetly, though the pen lay dry beside it. For a long moment, she stood still, staring at the page. Then she tore it out, crumpled it in her hand, and walked to the lobby. The chandelier flickered again, just once. The mirrors on the far wall caught her reflection, hundreds of them, each one slightly different. In one, she was younger. In another, she wasn't there at all. In one, someone else was standing where she should be. Evelyn Hart, the woman in the painting, the one who never checked out. She was smiling in every reflection. Claire pressed her palms against the glass, trying to breathe, but the air was too thin. It felt like the walls were leaning closer, like the entire hotel had drawn a breath and was holding it, waiting for her next move. She ran to the intercom, slammed the receiver down, and whispered, "I want to leave." There was no answer, only static. Then a soft click. A man's voice this time, calm, distant, precise. "You already have." The intercom died. Claire turned toward the front doors. They were open. For the first time since she arrived, the world outside looked real. Trees moving, light shifting. She stepped forward, almost afraid to hope. But when she crossed the threshold, she realized it wasn't morning at all. It was a photograph, a flat image of a road, nailed to the frame. Behind her, the lobby was gone. The floor was gone. The air was heavy and white, filled with the sound of her own pulse. The hotel had folded her inside itself. She looked down and saw the guest book in her hands again. Only now it was smaller, like a check-in card. Her name already written, the date blank. Something touched her shoulder, cold, weightless. She didn't turn around. The voice came soft, almost kind. Housekeeping never checks out. She nodded once, slowly, and the weight lifted. The book closed itself. The light faded. When the Ridgeway Hotel was finally demolished 3 years later, the crew found nothing inside but a single page caught beneath a cracked tile. The ink had run, but a few words were still visible. Room for one more. If you want more stories like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel. It really helps.